What happens when justice itself is corrupt? When those sworn to uphold the law twist it for their own gain? A woman, underestimated by all, walks into a courtroom, only to reveal a truth that will shake the entire system. Today, power shifts, and no one is ready for it. The towering courthouse loomed over Danielle Carter as she approached the grand entrance. She wore a simple gray blazer over a modest black dress, her heels clicking lightly against the marble steps. The day was warm, the city alive with its usual rhythm. But inside this building, where justice was supposed to reign, a storm was brewing. As Danielle reached for the door handle, a uniformed security guard stepped in front of her, blocking the way. He was tall, built like an ex-football player, his expression filled with suspicion. He eyed her from head to toe, then scoffed. "Where do you think you're going?" Danielle met his gaze, calm but firm. "I have a hearing today." The guard let out a sharp laugh. "Lady, this ain't free legal advice hour. What are you here for? Parking tickets? Some small claims dispute?" Danielle didn't react. She reached into her bag and pulled out an official-looking envelope. "I'm here for my case," she said evenly. The guard snatched the letter from her hand, barely glancing at it before tearing it in half. "You're wasting everyone's time," he sneered. "Go home." Danielle's fingers twitched, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had expected resistance, but not this blatant. A young lawyer passing by, a man no older than 30, paused to watch the exchange. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his briefcase hanging loosely at his side. His eyes flicked between Danielle and the guard, then he sighed. "You should just leave," the lawyer said, shaking his head. "No judge here is going to take you seriously." Danielle didn't respond. She simply stepped around the guard and walked into the courthouse, her pace steady. The lawyer stared after her in disbelief. The guard just snorted. "She's about to embarrass herself," he muttered. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Lawyers, reporters, clerks, all going about their business, waiting for the next case to begin. Danielle stepped up to the defense table, setting her bag down without a word. When the prosecutor finally noticed her, his eyes lit up with amusement. Hold on," he said, approaching the bench. "Where is your attorney?" Danielle met his gaze. "I am my attorney." The room fell silent. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the spectators. Someone whispered, "This is going to be quick." The prosecutor smirked. "So you're telling me you're representing yourself?" Danielle folded her hands on the table. "That's right." The prosecutor's smirk widened. "Then this will be over before lunch." Across the room, the judge, a heavy-set man with graying hair, finally spoke. "Let's move this along," he said impatiently. "I don't have time for theatrics." Danielle sat back. She had waited for this moment. Calmly, she reached into her blazer and pulled out another envelope, a thick, official-looking document. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it onto the judge's bench. The judge blinked, frowning. He picked it up. Then his expression changed. A hush fell over the room as he opened the envelope and froze. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the last page. His face, once filled with arrogance, turned ashen. The prosecutor, noticing the reaction, stepped forward and grabbed the document himself. The moment he read the words inside, his entire body stiffened. Danielle watched them both, unmoved, unreadable. Finally, the judge looked up, his voice hoarse. "Ms. Carter." He swallowed. Who are you?" Danielle stood slowly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, polished badge. Then, with careful precision, she set it down on the table for all to see. The golden emblem of the United States Supreme Court shone under the courtroom lights. Danielle lifted her chin, her voice steady. "I am the person you just tried to dismiss." The entire courtroom erupted. And outside, in the hallways of the courthouse, security guards and junior lawyers whispered in absolute disbelief. They had just denied entry to one of the most powerful legal figures in the country. And now, they were about to face the consequences. The moment Danielle Carter's Supreme Court badge hit the table, the courtroom descended into chaos. Gasps rippled through the audience. The court reporter froze mid-typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. A bailiff, who had been leaning lazily against the wall, suddenly stood at attention, eyes wide. The young prosecutor, still gripping the official letter, looked like he had just been punched in the gut. His smug confidence vanished, replaced by cold, creeping panic. And the judge? The once arrogant man gripped the bench tightly, his knuckles white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Danielle let the silence stretch, her calm gaze sweeping the room. She had expected disbelief, expected resistance. But what she hadn't expected was fear. Not the kind of fear that came from embarrassment. No, this was something deeper, darker. Danielle had spent years in law, and she knew that look. It was the look of a man who had just realized the walls were closing in. Slowly, she turned to the judge. "You were saying?" she asked, her voice smooth, unwavering. The judge licked his lips, struggling to regain control. This is highly irregular," he stammered. "Why was I not informed?" "You were." Danielle tapped the table, gesturing toward the shredded remains of the letter the security guard had torn up earlier. "Your court was notified of my presence." She let the words sink in. "And yet," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "I was blocked at the door. Disrespected. Mocked. Dismissed." Her eyes locked onto his. "Why is that, Your Honor?" The judge swallowed hard, his face pale. I wasn't aware." "Not aware," Danielle repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you knew exactly what you were doing." Another wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor, desperate to regain control, cleared his throat loudly. "This doesn't change anything," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your Honor, regardless of Ms. Carter's position, the case remains the same. She's here as a defendant." Danielle turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You're absolutely right," she said, stepping toward him. "That's exactly what I'm here to address." She stopped just inches away, her voice dropping low enough that only he could hear. "But tell me, Counselor, are you sure you want to proceed with this?" The prosecutor's jaw tightened, but she could see the hesitation creeping in. He knew something was wrong. Danielle didn't wait for him to respond. She turned, lifting her voice so the entire courtroom could hear. "I am here," she declared, "because I have been falsely accused." Her words commanded the room. "I was brought into this courthouse today under the assumption that I was powerless," she continued, "that I could be silenced, railroaded." Her gaze flickered back to the judge. "But what they didn't know," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "was that I was already watching them." The judge's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is completely inappropriate," he barked, slamming his gavel. "You are out of order." "I am the order," Danielle cut him off coldly. And then, she pulled out another document. A thick, sealed folder bearing the official insignia of the United States Department of Justice. The prosecutor's breath caught. The judge's eyes widened in horror. Danielle placed it gently on the bench, her calm smile never faltering. "You'll want to read that," she said. The judge hesitated. For the first time, his hands trembled. He reached forward, slowly breaking the seal. The courtroom held its breath. Danielle waited, watching as the judge's eyes scanned the first page. Then the second. Then, his face turned to pure terror. The prosecutor, too impatient to wait, grabbed the document from him. His eyes darted across the words. Then he staggered back. This is," he stammered. Danielle nodded. "A federal investigation." Into this courtroom. The gasps that followed were louder than before. "You are under investigation," she continued, looking at the judge, "for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice." The judge gripped the edges of his bench, his breathing uneven. This is absurd. Who do you think you are?" Danielle reached into her pocket. She pulled out her second badge. Not the Supreme Court one. This one was worse. She set it down right next to the judge's shaking hands. The entire room froze. The golden emblem of the FBI gleamed under the courtroom lights. Danielle leaned in slightly, her voice just above a whisper. "I think I'm the person you should have taken seriously." A crushing silence filled the air. Then, the doors burst open, and the real authorities stepped in. The heavy courtroom doors slammed open, and a team of federal agents poured in, their movements swift and precise. The sound of their boots echoed against the polished floor as they took strategic positions around the room. Gasps filled the air. A few spectators scrambled to their feet, trying to process the scene. Court clerks whispered frantically to each other. Some reached for their phones, ready to record what was shaping up to be a historic moment. The judge's face went from red to ghostly pale. His fingers clawed at the edge of his bench, as if it could somehow keep him from losing control of the situation. The prosecutor stepped back, bumping into the table behind him. His mouth opened, and closed like a fish gasping for air. Danielle remained still, watching calmly as two agents approached the bench. One of them, a tall woman with a no-nonsense expression, pulled out a warrant and placed it in front of the judge. "Your Honor, Thomas Whitaker, you are under federal investigation for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to pervert the course of law." The entire room erupted. A woman in the gallery clapped a hand over her mouth in shock. The stenographer fumbled her notepad, nearly knocking it to the floor. The judge shook his head violently. This is insane. I am a sitting judge. You can't just. We can." The agent cut him off, her tone firm. "And we are." Danielle watched him unravel, arms folded, completely composed. The judge turned on her, rage flaring behind his eyes. "You? This is your doing." Danielle tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering in her gaze. "It's called accountability, Your Honor. Something I'm sure you're unfamiliar with." The judge lurched to his feet, hands slamming onto the bench. "I demand this trial be adjourned immediately. This is a setup." "You're right about one thing," Danielle said, stepping forward. "This trial is over. Just not in the way you thought." The agent nodded at her men. "Take him." Two agents grabbed the judge's arms, yanking them behind his back. "No, you can't do this to me," he roared, his voice cracking with panic. He thrashed violently, trying to break free. "I am the law." Danielle smirked. "Not anymore." The cold metallic snap of handcuffs sealed his fate. The prosecutor stumbled backward, shaking his head. I had no idea," he stammered. His hands trembled as he turned to Danielle. I didn't know he was." Danielle cut him off with a sharp glance. "You worked under him for years. And you never questioned why cases like mine kept getting railroaded." The prosecutor opened his mouth, but found no excuse to offer. The lead agent turned to him. "Prosecutor Richard Hale, we need you to come with us for questioning." Hale looked ready to collapse. He staggered, then sank into his chair, his face buried in his hands. "God help me," he muttered under his breath. Danielle had no sympathy. "You were more than willing to destroy lives," she said calmly, "until you realized your own was next." Hale didn't reply. Just as the judge was being dragged out, the courtroom doors opened once more. A group of uniformed officers entered, their faces grim. But they weren't looking at Danielle. They were looking at the bailiffs. The lead officer spoke firmly. "We have reason to believe some members of courthouse security have been involved in obstructing justice. You will be taken into custody for questioning." The security guard who had mocked Danielle earlier stiffened. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But there was none. "Hands where we can see them," an officer ordered. The guard swallowed hard, hesitating. Then, finally, he lifted his hands slowly into the air. Danielle watched, satisfaction settling deep in her chest. Every person who had tried to silence her was now facing the consequences. One by one, they were let out in chains. The courtroom was silent now, save for the scribbling of reporters furiously taking notes. Danielle took a breath, steady and controlled. She had come in here as a defendant. She was leaving as the woman who exposed an empire of corruption. She gathered her belongings, ignoring the stunned whispers around her. As she reached the door, a young woman rushed up to her, one of the junior clerks who had witnessed everything unfold. "Ms. Carter," she breathed. I had no idea. What you did today." She swallowed hard, emotion thick in her voice. "Thank you." Danielle offered her a small nod, then pushed open the doors. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing. But she didn't stop. She walked through them, shoulders back, unbothered. As she reached the sidewalk, a black SUV pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp suit. A federal official. "Agent Carter," he said smoothly, nodding in approval. Danielle's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Where to next?" she asked. The man smirked. "Wherever justice takes you." Danielle stepped into the car. The door clicked shut. The world had just learned who she was. And she was just getting started. The black SUV moved smoothly through the city streets, its tinted windows shielding Danielle Carter from the flashing cameras she had left behind. The courthouse had fallen into chaos, and while justice had been served, Danielle knew this was only the beginning. She sat across from Special Agent Michael Langley, a seasoned federal investigator from the Department of Justice. He was calm, composed, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness, a quiet urgency. I have to admit, Langley said, breaking the silence. That was quite a performance back there. Danielle leaned back, expression unreadable. I wasn't performing. I was correcting an injustice. Langley smirked slightly. Fair enough. But you just threw a rock into a still pond. The ripples are going to hit places you didn't expect. Danielle folded her arms, unshaken. Then it's a good thing I don't mind making waves. Langley studied her for a moment before sliding a file across the seat toward her. This case goes deeper than you think, he said. Danielle picked up the folder, flipping it open. Her eyes scanned the contents, her stomach tightening. Inside were documents, wire transfers, phone records, names she recognized, judges, prosecutors, high-ranking police officials. And at the very top of the page was a name that made her blood run cold. Chief Justice Leonard Graves. Danielle's fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. The Chief Justice? She murmured, her voice carefully neutral. Langley nodded. Your case today? It was supposed to be another routine cover-up, but you exposed the cracks in the system. Danielle closed the file. And now they know I'm a problem. Langley nodded. More than that. You're a threat. A pause. Then, Danielle smiled. Good. The SUV came to a stop outside a secure government building. As soon as Danielle stepped out, a federal agent approached hurriedly, his face tense. Agent Carter, he said, nodding. There's something you need to see. Danielle followed him inside, down a corridor that led to a high-tech surveillance room. Screens flickered, displaying security footage, live feeds from various locations. One screen caught her attention immediately. It was footage from outside her home. A black sedan sat parked across the street, its engine idling, headlights off. Danielle's eyes narrowed. How long has it been there? Since you left for the courthouse this morning, the agent said. We ran the plates. They're fake. Danielle exhaled slowly, her mind sharpening. So they're watching me. Langley, who had followed her inside, crossed his arms. They're doing more than watching. Another screen switched, showing a different angle of the same car. The back door opened, and a man stepped out, speaking into a phone. Danielle froze. She knew that face. It was one of Chief Justice Graves' personal aides. Langley turned to her. They're making their next move. The question is, how are you going to respond? Danielle's jaw tightened. She already knew the answer. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to bring the fight to them. Danielle Carter stood in the dimly lit surveillance room, her eyes fixed on the screen showing the black sedan idling outside her home. The realization was clear. Chief Justice Leonard Graves knew she was a threat. And now, he was making his move. Langley, standing beside her, let out a slow breath. They're not subtle. This is intimidation, plain and simple. Danielle's lips curled into a smirk. Then they underestimated who they're trying to intimidate. Langley studied her carefully. We can put you in protective custody, move you somewhere safe until we gather enough evidence to take this all the way. Danielle turned to him, her expression deadly calm. No. Langley raised an eyebrow. No. She folded her arms. You said it yourself. This runs deep. If I disappear now, they'll just bury the evidence, silence witnesses, and by the time I resurface, the trail will be cold. She turned back to the screen. No, I'm not running. I'm making my move. Langley smirked slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. An hour later, Danielle and Langley sat inside an unmarked SUV, parked a few blocks from her apartment. The black sedan was still there, its occupant oblivious to the fact that the game had changed. She lifted a burner phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a gruff male voice answered. What? Danielle smirked. Ethan, you still know how to track a phone. A pause. Then, a low chuckle. Damn, Carter. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. Who's got you in trouble this time? She leaned back in her seat. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Another pause. Then, oh, that kind of trouble. Danielle smiled. Can you do it or not? Ethan scoffed. Already done. I intercepted a call from your shadow about 20 minutes ago. He's reporting back to someone. Danielle's fingers tightened around the phone. Where's the call going? A few clicks echoed on the other end before Ethan whistled softly. Now, this is interesting, he mused. They're routing through multiple lines, but I traced the origin. Danielle leaned forward. Tell me. Ethan chuckled. Your friend isn't reporting back to Graves' office. He's calling a private security firm. Danielle frowned. Graves hired mercenaries? Not just any mercenaries, Ethan corrected. He hired Shadow Dominion. Langley, who had been listening in, stiffened. You're kidding. Danielle turned to him. Who are they? Langley let out a slow breath. They're ex-military, ex-intelligence, a black ops group that went private. They specialize in making problems disappear. Danielle's stomach tightened. She wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. Danielle clicked the phone off and turned to Langley. How fast can we get a warrant to shut down their operation? Langley shook his head. They're ghosts. They operate outside the law, and they cover their tracks well. We can't just walk into their offices with a badge and a smile. Danielle's mind worked quickly, piecing together her next move. Then we don't take the legal route, she said. Langley's eyes narrowed. What are you thinking? She glanced at the screen one last time, at the man in the black sedan, still waiting, still reporting. Then, she opened the SUV door. Langley cursed. Danielle? She held up a hand. Trust me. And with that, she walked toward the sedan. The man inside was too focused on his phone to notice her at first. But as she reached the driver's side, she rapped her knuckles against the window. He jumped, eyes widening. Danielle smiled. Mind if we talk? He scrambled for something, probably a gun. But before he could, Langley was at the passenger side, gun already drawn. Bad idea, Langley said flatly. The man froze. Danielle opened the door, leaned down, and lowered her voice to a whisper. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly who you've been talking to, or I'm going to make sure your employers think you have. The man swallowed hard. You don't know what you're doing, he stammered. Danielle's smile didn't fade. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. She glanced at his phone. Now, who's on the other end of that call? The man in the black sedan was frozen in place, his eyes darting between Danielle Carter and the gun Langley had casually resting against the passenger window. Sweat gathered at his temple, his fingers still gripping his phone. Danielle tilted her head slightly, watching him with a patience that felt more dangerous than any threat she could make. I'll ask one more time, she said softly, her voice dangerously calm. Who's on the other end of that call? The man swallowed hard, his breathing shallow. You don't understand, he stammered. If I talk, I'm dead. Danielle smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. If you don't talk, you're already dead. Langley pressed the gun slightly against the window, a quiet reminder of reality. Decide fast. The man let out a shaky breath and, after a brief hesitation, lowered his phone onto his lap, screen still active. Danielle's eyes flickered to the name on the screen. Unknown caller. Of course. But there was something else. A live call timer still ticking. Whoever was on the other end was still listening. Danielle's lips curled into a smirk. Well, she murmured, picking up the phone. Since you're so interested in my business, let's chat. And then she pressed the speaker button. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a slow, deliberate chuckle filled the car. Agent Carter, a voice said, smooth as silk. I was wondering when we'd speak directly. Danielle's spine straightened, though she kept her expression unreadable. I don't believe we've been introduced. Oh, but I know all about you, the voice continued. I've been following your career for quite some time. You have a bad habit of interfering with things beyond your understanding. Langley frowned, clearly recognizing the voice but staying quiet, letting Danielle take the lead. She leaned against the car, her grip tightening around the phone. And you have a bad habit of hiding behind disposable pawns. The man in the driver's seat flinched, clearly realizing his expendability. The voice chuckled again. Always so sharp, Agent Carter. But let's not pretend you have the upper hand here. You've made enemies in very high places. Danielle didn't blink. Funny. I thought I was making examples out of them. A pause. Then, a dark amusement laced the man's next words. That arrogance of yours is going to get you killed. Danielle smiled coldly. Then you'd better hope you do it right the first time. Langley, still gripping his gun, finally spoke. Who are you? The man on the phone let out a long, exaggerated sigh. Introductions. Where are my manners? There was a brief rustling on the line, as if the man had shifted in his seat. You can call me Mr. Black. Danielle and Langley exchanged a glance. She arched an eyebrow. Mr. Black? That's the best you've got? Sounds like something out of a bad spy novel. Perhaps, Mr. Black mused. But you'll find that I'm very real. And unlike your little courthouse stunt, this game isn't played in public. Danielle's grip on the phone tightened slightly. You mean the game where your boss, Chief Justice Graves, launders power through corrupt judges and prosecutors? A low chuckle. Oh, Agent Carter. You really think Graves is the mastermind? Danielle stilled. Langley's eyes narrowed, clearly catching the implication. You're lying, Danielle said, her voice cool. Graves has been covering up cases for years. I have the files to prove it. You have pieces of the puzzle, Mr. Black corrected. But you're missing the full picture. And the problem with playing chess, Agent Carter, is that you've been so focused on the board, you haven't looked up to see who's actually moving the pieces. Danielle's stomach tightened. Langley muttered under his breath. Damn it. Mr. Black sighed dramatically. I was hoping we could come to an understanding. But I see now that you'll insist on playing hero. Danielle smirked, but her eyes remained sharp. And what? You thought I'd just take a bribe and walk away? A pause. Then, for the first time, the voice on the other end turned cold. No, Agent Carter. I thought you'd realize when you were already dead. The line went dead. Danielle froze. Then, gunfire erupted from the rooftop across the street. Langley lunged, dragging Danielle down behind the car as bullets shattered the windshield. The man in the black sedan screamed, ducking low as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Sniper! Langley shouted, pulling his gun. Danielle cursed, her mind racing. They had just been baited into an execution. She yanked open the driver's side door, dragging the wounded man out. Move, she barked at Langley. They sprinted toward the SUV as bullets rained down around them, glass exploding, tires bursting. Langley jumped behind the wheel, peeling out of the parking lot. Danielle shoved the bleeding man into the back seat, pressing a hand against his wound. Who hired the sniper? She demanded. The man gasped, pain clouding his eyes. It's not just Graves. Danielle leaned in. Who? The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then his body went completely still. Langley checked the rearview mirror. He's dead, isn't he? Danielle gritted her teeth. They had been seconds away from the truth. And now? The game had just changed. Danielle Carter stared at the lifeless body slumped in the back seat, her mind racing. They had been seconds away from the truth. Now, the only person who could have given them Graves' real connection was dead in her car, a sniper's bullet lodged somewhere in his chest. Langley's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. Damn it. The SUV swerved through traffic, tires screeching as he took a sharp turn. Danielle braced herself, her mind already recalculating their next move. We need a safe place, Langley muttered. Somewhere they can't track us. Danielle glanced at the rearview mirror, watching as the dark city skyline blurred past them. She exhaled sharply. No. Langley frowned. No. Danielle sat forward. We don't run. We don't hide. We hit back. Langley let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Danielle, we just walked into a setup. A dead witness, a sniper watching us, whoever's behind this just made their move. And you want to go straight at them? Danielle turned to face him, her eyes cold, calculating. They're expecting us to react like prey. So we act like predators instead. Langley gripped the wheel tighter. And how do you suggest we do that? Danielle reached into her pocket and pulled out the dead man's phone. It was still on. And the last call to Mr. Black was still logged. She tapped the screen. We call them back. Langley snapped his head toward her. That's insane. Danielle smirked. No. It's strategy. She pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then a quiet click. Silence. Then, the same voice from earlier, Mr. Black. Agent Carter, he greeted smoothly, as if they were old friends. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Danielle kept her tone even. Neither do you. That sniper missed. A soft chuckle. No, Agent Carter. He didn't miss. He just wasn't aiming for you. Yet, Langley, still focused on driving, stole a sharp glance at her. He's bluffing. Danielle didn't think so. You're getting desperate, she said, watching the city lights blur past. Killing a low-level informant? That was sloppy. Which means you're scared. The laughter disappeared. A quiet beat passed. Then, Mr. Black's tone changed. You think because you exposed one corrupt judge, you've won? He asked, almost amused. You haven't even touched the surface of this game. Danielle's grip on the phone tightened slightly. Then enlighten me. Another pause. Then, you've been asking the wrong question, Agent Carter. It's not about who's involved. Danielle froze slightly, processing his words. It's about why. Her breath hitched. And suddenly, she saw it. The corruption. The pattern. She thought she had been peeling away layers of a conspiracy. But what if the corruption wasn't the real goal? What if the corruption was the distraction? Langley must have noticed her change in expression. Danielle. But she wasn't listening. Mr. Black exhaled, almost pitying. I see you figured it out. Danielle's mind raced. Every case, Graves buried. Every innocent person wrongfully convicted. Every judge, prosecutor, and law enforcement officer he protected. They weren't just covering up crimes. They were selecting their targets. Graves and his people weren't just corrupt. They were using the system to eliminate threats before they ever became threats. And if that was true, Danielle's breath caught. Her own name had to be somewhere on their list. The realization hit hard. "You never planned to kill me in that courthouse," she murmured. Mr. Black chuckled. "Now you're getting it." Danielle clenched her jaw. "You wanted me to step forward. You were the perfect test," he admitted. "The question was, if we pushed you far enough, would you fight back?" Danielle's stomach turned cold. "You wanted me to make a move." "Of course," Mr. Black confirmed. "Because now, we know exactly how dangerous you are." The line went dead. Danielle stared at the phone, the silence in the car suffocating. Langley's voice was sharp. "Danielle, talk to me. What the hell just happened?" Danielle closed her eyes for half a second, letting everything click into place. Then, she looked up. "We were never uncovering a conspiracy," she said. Langley frowned. "What?" Danielle's grip on the phone tightened. "We were walking into a recruitment test." Langley's eyes went wide. And suddenly, the black SUV behind them sped up. Danielle's instincts screamed. "Drive," she shouted. Langley slammed his foot on the gas, but it was too late. The SUV behind them swerved forward, ramming into their bumper. The impact sent their vehicle spinning. Glass shattered. Tires screeched. And in the chaos, Danielle knew one thing for sure. They weren't being hunted anymore. They were being collected. The SUV spun wildly, tires screeching against the pavement as metal groaned under the force of impact. Danielle braced herself, heart pounding, as Langley fought to regain control. Another hit from behind. Harder. The force sent them crashing through a barricade, the vehicle tilting dangerously before slamming back onto all four wheels. Danielle's head snapped forward, a split second before airbags deployed, slamming into her chest. The world blurred. Pain radiated through her ribs, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She had to move. Langley was slumped forward, dazed but breathing. "Danielle." Before he could finish, the SUV doors were yanked open. A hand grabbed Danielle by the collar, dragging her out before she could react. She twisted, throwing an elbow, but her attacker was faster. A sharp jab landed against her ribs, knocking the wind from her lungs. She barely had time to register the men in tactical gear, their movements precise, rehearsed. Not cops, not street thugs. Professionals. Langley was being pulled from the driver's seat, struggling, cursing. His gun was already gone. Danielle swung again, this time landing a solid hit to her attacker's jaw. He barely flinched. Another blow, sharp, direct, struck the side of her neck. Her vision flickered. Her knees buckled. And the last thing she heard before the world went black was Mr. Black's voice. "Welcome to the real game, Agent Carter." Danielle's eyelids fluttered open, the world around her coming back in fragments. Concrete walls, dim lighting, a faint hum of electricity. Her hands were tied behind her, the zip ties digging into her wrists. A dull ache throbbed at the base of her skull, her body still recovering from the hit. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. Assess, observe, plan. Across from her, Langley was restrained to a chair, his breathing shallow but steady. Still alive. Good. Footsteps echoed from the hall outside. Controlled. Unhurried. Then, the door opened. Mr. Black entered. Now that she could see him in person, she wasn't surprised. A man in his mid-40s, dressed in a tailored black suit. Sharp eyes, a calculating expression. A man who didn't just give orders, he pulled strings. He smiled. Comfortable. Danielle tilted her head slightly, as if considering. The hospitality could use some work. Mr. Black chuckled. "You have no idea how rare it is for me to meet someone who isn't afraid of me." Danielle smirked. "Maybe you're just not as scary as you think." His smile didn't falter, but she caught the slight tightening of his jaw. She was getting to him. Good. Mr. Black pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Do you know why you're here, Agent Carter?" Danielle held his gaze. "Because I became a problem." He nodded. "Correct. But do you know why?" She stayed silent. Mr. Black leaned forward. "The system you think you've been fighting? It isn't broken." Danielle's brows furrowed slightly. Mr. Black smiled. "It works exactly as it was designed to." Langley stirred, letting out a weak chuckle. "That's real inspiring. You print that on recruitment posters." Mr. Black ignored him, eyes still on Danielle. You think exposing corrupt judges makes a difference? You think taking down Chief Justice Graves changes anything? He shook his head. Graves is a pawn, just like Whitaker, just like all of them. Danielle's breath slowed. He was leading her somewhere, and she didn't like it. Mr. Black leaned back, studying her. You're smart. You've already figured out that the cases being buried weren't just random acts of corruption. They were deliberate. Danielle didn't answer, which only made him smile wider. You see it now, don't you? He murmured. This isn't about money. It's not even about power. His voice lowered. It's about control. The words sent a chill through her. Mr. Black exhaled, almost sounding amused. Do you know how civilizations really survive, Agent Carter? Danielle stayed silent. Mr. Black leaned in. By eliminating threats before they become threats. A heavy silence settled between them. Danielle's jaw tightened. They weren't just covering up crimes. They were selecting who lived and who didn't. Langley shifted, his voice hoarse. So what? You want us to be impressed? Mr. Black smirked. No, I want you to understand. Danielle met his gaze. Understand what? He smiled. That you have two choices. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. You can keep fighting and end up exactly like the people you try to save. Danielle's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. Or, Mr. Black continued, stepping toward the door, you can join us. Danielle's heart pounded. Langley let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Oh, that's rich. But Mr. Black wasn't looking at him. He was looking directly at Danielle. You're not like the others, he said softly. You don't just expose problems. You solve them. We could use someone like you. Danielle stared at him, her mind running through every possible outcome. Her next words had to be perfect. Finally, she let out a slow exhale. And she smiled. Well, she murmured, since you put it so nicely. Mr. Black's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Then, Danielle's chair snapped backward as she kicked off the ground, throwing herself into a roll. Her legs swung up, catching the nearest guard's neck and twisting him to the ground. Langley lunged sideways, knocking another man off balance. Chaos erupted. Danielle's hands were still tied, but that didn't stop her. She twisted, grabbing the fallen guard's knife with her fingers and cutting through the zip ties in one quick motion. Mr. Black stepped back, his smile gone. Danielle rose to her feet, breathing hard. She flicked the knife once. Then she turned to Mr. Black. Let's make this interesting. Danielle Carter didn't hesitate. The moment she was free, she moved like a weapon finally unleashed. The knife in her hand flashed under the dim light, her body already calculating her next 3 moves before anyone else could react. Mr. Black took a measured step back, his eyes sharp, but not surprised. Impressive, he murmured. But predictable. Danielle ignored him. She had bigger problems, the armed guards closing in. Behind her, Langley was still struggling against the zip ties cutting into his wrists. Too vulnerable. Danielle twisted on her heel, dodging a strike from one of the guards before slamming the knife into his shoulder. He grunted in pain, stumbling back. 2 more lunged toward her. Danielle ducked, grabbed the fallen guard's sidearm, and fired. 2 shots. The first guard dropped instantly. The second jerked backward, clutching his bleeding leg. Langley kicked his chair over, using the momentum to roll onto his knees. Danielle didn't even look. She just flipped the knife backward and cut his restraints in one clean motion. Langley sprang up, snatching a fallen gun. Now it was a fight. Mr. Black watched them work, his expression unreadable. Even as his men fell around him, he didn't panic. Because he knew something they didn't. He sighed. You two are making this far more dramatic than it needs to be. Danielle ignored him, already scanning the room. 1 door. 2 guards left. 1 wounded. Easy. She raised her weapon. Step aside, and I won't kill you. Mr. Black smirked. Agent Carter, he said smoothly. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Danielle hesitated, just for a second. And that was what he was waiting for. The room lights suddenly cut out, plunging them into darkness. Langley cursed. Son of a... Danielle didn't wait. She grabbed his wrist and yanked him forward, dodging the first hail of gunfire from the remaining guards. Flashes of muzzle fire illuminated the chaos. Move, she hissed, already pulling him toward the door. Langley fired a wild shot behind them, forcing their attackers to take cover. They reached the exit, only to find it electronically locked. Danielle's stomach twisted. Mr. Black's voice echoed through the dark. You still think you're in control, Agent Carter? Danielle slammed her fist against the control panel. No good. Then, a flicker of emergency lighting kicked on, casting eerie red shadows across the room. Danielle whirled around. Mr. Black was gone. Langley let out a breath. Of course he disappeared. That guy is like a damn ghost. Danielle wasn't listening. She was thinking. Fast. We need a manual override, she muttered. Langley glanced around, eyes narrowing. There. A security panel along the far wall. Exposed wires. Vulnerable. But it was across the room, past the remaining guards. Danielle gritted her teeth. Cover me. Langley nodded, raising his gun as she sprinted. Bullets whizzed past her, but she didn't slow. She dove forward, hit the ground in a roll, and came up right in front of the panel. Fingers flying, she ripped open the casing. Red, green, blue wires. One of them was the lock override. Which one? Langley called, still firing shots to keep the guards pinned down. Danielle's mind raced. Not red. Red was alarm systems. Blue? Maybe. Green. A guard charged toward her. Danielle yanked the green wire and twisted it free. For a second, nothing happened. Then a hiss. A metallic unlock. The door slid open. Danielle grinned. Go, she shouted. Langley moved first, taking out the last standing guard with a precise shot before sprinting through the door. Danielle followed, gun raised in case of another ambush. But there was no one waiting. Only an empty hallway, and a security alarm already blaring. Danielle and Langley raced down the corridor, their footfalls echoing against the steel walls. They needed an exit. Fast. Langley checked his watch. We've got about 2 minutes before reinforcements show up. Danielle scanned the hall. There. A storage room door, unmarked. She kicked it open and froze. Inside was a row of computer servers. Screens flickered, displaying classified documents, court files, police records, financial transactions. Langley let out a low whistle. Jesus, this isn't just a safe house. This is their data hub. Danielle moved quickly, her eyes scanning the files. Then she saw it. Her own name. Agent Danielle Carter. Langley looked over her shoulder. That's a kill order. Danielle exhaled sharply. No, it's worse. She pointed at another name, one that made her stomach drop. The President of the United States. Langley stilled. Danielle turned to him. They're not just covering up crimes. They're controlling the government. Langley didn't respond right away. Then he pulled out his gun. So we burn this place to the ground, right? Danielle smiled. Obviously. She grabbed a USB drive from her pocket and jammed it into the nearest console, copying as much data as possible. Langley set a remote charge against one of the server racks. The countdown began, 3 minutes. They sprinted toward the nearest exit, gunfire echoing behind them. Danielle shoved the door open, revealing the night sky, and a row of black SUVs waiting outside. Langley cursed. Of course. Danielle checked the countdown. 1 minute. Then, a voice from behind. Going somewhere. She turned. Mr. Black stood calmly in the doorway, completely unfazed. Danielle smirked. Yeah. Home. The explosives detonated. The building shook violently, fire erupting from within. Danielle and Langley bolted, dodging as debris rained from the sky. Mr. Black vanished into the smoke. The fight wasn't over. But this battle? They had just won. The fire raged behind them, lighting up the night sky as Danielle Carter and Langley sprinted toward the tree line, gunfire cracking in the distance. The facility was gone, reduced to flames and rubble. They had destroyed everything, files, servers, all of it. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. A row of black SUVs still waited at the edge of the compound, their headlights cutting through the thick smoke. Langley cursed under his breath. We're still outnumbered. Danielle didn't slow down. We don't need to fight them. Langley gave her a sharp look. What exactly is your plan here, Carter? She grinned. To let them chase us. And then, she changed direction. Instead of running away from the SUVs, she ran toward them. Langley hesitated for half a second before following. I hate when you do this. Danielle didn't answer. She zeroed in on the nearest vehicle, its driver already stepping out, raising a weapon. She moved first. A single shot, clean, precise, dropped him instantly. She lunged forward, yanking open the driver's side door and throwing herself inside. Langley was right behind her, climbing into the passenger seat. Danielle's hands flew over the controls. Keys still in the ignition. Perfect. She slammed the SUV into drive and hit the gas, tires screaming against the pavement. The other SUVs roared to life, headlights blinding as they peeled out after them. Langley twisted in his seat, checking the side mirror. "We've got 3 on us. One's trying to cut ahead." Danielle's grip tightened around the wheel. "Hold on." She jerked the wheel hard to the right, swerving off the road and into the dense tree line. The vehicle bounced violently, branches whipping against the windows. "Jesus, Carter!" Langley shouted, gripping the dashboard. But Danielle was laser-focused. She knew what she was doing. The SUVs behind them struggled, their tires skidding against the uneven dirt. "One down," Langley reported as one of the cars spun out, crashing into a tree. Danielle didn't slow. Ahead, the trees opened up, revealing a highway. "If we hit that road, we're ghosts," Langley said. Danielle pushed the engine harder. "Then let's disappear." The SUV burst onto the pavement, the last 2 chase vehicles right behind them. Langley grabbed his gun. "Keep it steady." Danielle didn't need to be told twice. Langley leaned out the window, aimed carefully, and fired. One shot. A direct hit to the front tire of the nearest SUV. The vehicle veered hard, flipping twice before slamming onto its roof. "Nice shot," Danielle muttered. Langley grinned. "Still got it. One left." The final SUV sped up, pulling alongside them. And behind the wheel, Danielle's breath caught. Mr. Black, unshaken, unbothered, smiling. Their eyes met through the window. Danielle gritted her teeth. "Take the wheel," she ordered. Langley blinked. "Excuse me." Danielle didn't repeat herself. She let go of the wheel, yanked the door open, and climbed onto the side of the moving vehicle. Langley cursed. "You are insane." Danielle jumped. She landed hard on the hood of Mr. Black's SUV, her fingers gripping the edge to keep from sliding off. Mr. Black's expression didn't change. With a sharp turn, he tried to shake her off. Danielle held on, reaching for her gun, but he was faster. The windshield shattered as he fired through it, forcing her to roll to the side. She swung herself onto the roof, moving quickly as he emptied his clip. No more bullets. Now it was a fight. Danielle kicked in the passenger window and dropped inside. Mr. Black met her with a punch. It was fast, brutal, knocking her head back, but she recovered. She caught his wrist, twisted hard, forcing the gun from his grip. He countered, grabbing the steering wheel and jerking it violently. The SUV spun out, tires screeching, metal grinding. Danielle slammed into the dashboard but didn't let go. The vehicle crashed through a guardrail and plunged into the river below. Cold water rushed in instantly, filling the cabin. Danielle gasped, her body going into survival mode. Across from her, Mr. Black remained still, watching her through the rising water. His expression wasn't panicked. It was accepting. Danielle didn't wait to see what he'd do. She kicked the door open, the force sending her spiraling into the dark current. The water pulled at her, dragging her down. She fought against it, kicking toward the surface, lungs burning. Finally, she broke through, gasping for air. Langley's SUV was already parked on the bank, his form silhouetted against the headlights. "Danielle," he called. She swam toward him, shivering as he pulled her onto the shore. Langley glanced at the river. "Where is he?" Danielle followed his gaze. The SUV was gone, dragged beneath the current. And Mr. Black was finally out of moves. The next morning, Danielle sat in a secure briefing room, watching the files they had recovered scroll across a screen. Chief Justice Graves was already in federal custody. But the real war? It was just beginning. Langley leaned against the table. "So what's next?" Danielle smiled faintly. "We hunt the rest."